He's considered one of the greatest drivers in racing history. Victor at the 24 Hours of Le Mans, winner of the 1967 Belgian Grand Prix in the All-American Racers Eagle, and the founding father of the Champagne Spraying Winner's Circle celebration. But Dan Gurney's early career was filled with hot rods, drag racing, Bonneville land speed attempts, and sports cars of all sorts. Welcome to Dream Rides, presented by Steel Rubber.
I had no idea that you could become a professional race driver. If there was ever a question, I'd always say, yeah, I'll drive it, and they said, okay.
Dan Gurney's world-famous All-American Racers operation is based in an industrial area of Santa Ana, California. But this West Coast racing legend's roots reach back nearly 70 years to New York.
I have very fond memories of Long Island. I saw Phil Walters under the name of racing under the name of Ted Tabbitt, driving Curtis Craft midgets at Freeport Stadium. Phil Walters was my role model. I really appreciated the way he could work his way through traffic without knocking everybody off ahead of him. But I never saw him in a race where he didn't move forward all the time. In 1948, I graduated from Manhasset High School, and then it was about 4 or 5 days later, we were on our way to California. I had a 40 Ford Standard, and my sister, Celissa, and I were in that, and Mom and Dad were in a 48 Pontiac Woody, which was a great car. One of the places we stopped was White Sands, New Mexico, and of course, that was the part where they set off one of the first atomic bombs, and but I didn't see any of that. Probably got radiated, but didn't realize it. Anyway, we got to California, and I thought, this. I don't know what these people are raving for, because it looks to me like a bunch of sand and dead sticks. There were no trees at all out there. They didn't even know what a tree looked like. So that was the beginning. It took me a while before I realized California was still a terrific place. Looking forward to California, I had already sent away for California Bill's hot rod, little tiny book about hot rods. So I thought, oh boy, here I come. And there was a really great looking 32 5-window chop top coupe, 32 Ford, that I thought, and I ended up trading my 1940 Standard for that. Engine-wise, that car should have had a Mercury engine in it, which would have enabled it to be a little bit larger bore, but found out it didn't. That was also part of my education. So I had it 80 over bore, was about as far as I could get it, and a 1/4-inch stroke. And I built it with, assembled it, didn't build it, but assembled it with Evans heads and a Edelbrock 3 carburetor manifold, and made my own headers, and had a Iski 1014 camshaft in it, and it was a huge thrill. But I ended up losing my license. I got 18 tickets and lost my license, and therefore had to be very careful while I was driving. Because of losing my license, I ended up driving a stealth car, which was a 1935 Ford that had been sideswiped, and it didn't look very great, but it was pretty sound underneath, and I took my good engine and put it in that car, and the police didn't seem to bother you because it was such a lousy looking car, but also it had only mechanical brakes on it. And I'm sure that had a lot to do with what later became my driving style, because if you have mechanical brakes, and I took the brakes off the rear because they didn't work very well anyway, so I only front wheel brakes only. I had to anticipate what might happen ahead and have enough brakes to take care of whatever is going to turn out. And that anticipation is way better than reaction. Skip Hudson, I first met outside of Riverside JC, Junior College, and he had a 29A Roadster with a V8 in it. His car made the cover of Hot Rod magazine at one time. Anyway, it was a great looking car. And I hung around, asked questions, and that was, we became close friends.
When Dream Rides presented by Steel Rubber continues, you'll see how Dan's friendship with Skip Hudson would shape both of their lives. Stay with us. This edition of Dream Rides, presented by Steel Rubber Products, is being brought to you by ARP, the world leader in fastener technology. Original Parts Group, the world's largest source for GMA body parts and accessories. And by Steel Rubber, quality crafted rubber parts and weather stripping. Welcome back to Dream Rides and our conversation with Dan Gurney. When Dan arrived in Southern California, his friendship with Skip Hudson grew from their mutual love of cars.
If you were a hot rod enthusiast, why, Bonneville was almost heaven, where you hoped you would be able to go one of these days. And there were four of us, Skip and I and Raymond Torres, who had the fastest hot rod in Riverside at the time. Teddy Bear had a cut-down car that we used as a tow, so we made a tow rig and towed Skip's car with Raymond Torres' engine in it, and my engine was a spare engine in the back of my 35 Ford. So that was we're headed for Bonneville. We probably left Ruby's Drive-In there in Riverside about midnight. And it was a great adventure. It'd go about 100 in second gear. And normally on the road, you didn't feel that, and that was pretty good. So you had the smell of the methanol, the noise of the open headers, and the tall gearing is just, and no windshield, and your goggles. And we did run 130.43, I think, something like that, which we were very proud of, which wasn't a bad speed for a street roadster without any other preparation, other than going methanol instead of gasoline. But it was very memorable, fabulous. In 1950-51, I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. The Korean War was going on. I knew that was have to be pretty exciting, and I was off. Ended up 18 months in Korea. I ended up being Corporal Gurney, and I was the gun mechanic for the Baker Battery of the 78th AAA Gun Battalion. We were in the Chorwan Valley. We got pretty close to the 38th parallel. I was issued a Jeep, and I could have a guy ride with me, and we were up looking for some special vacuum tubes for the electronic controls. And make a long story short, I was in a hurry to get back and probably going a little bit too fast. And some guy who was bucking for a promotion He waved me down and I stopped, figuring I wasn't going that fast. And in the end, I lost my license. My interest after getting out of the service was still, what shall I do with life? I have to take care of the family. And really, it doesn't look like there's any professional road racing, but if you try to peer into the future, I bet there is. My first race car was a used Triumph TR2, and it was standard with the exception it had a Mallory ignition system on it. It wasn't quite as fast as Skip Hudson's Porsche Speedster, but it was close enough to hang in there. Because of the ignition, I ended up being stuck in the modified class. At the end of the race, all the wheels were loose enough so you could unscrew the nuts on the holding the wheel onto the axles, the car, and I didn't know how to heel and toe. So at the end of a straightaway, there'd be a silence, and I'd just be steering it still in top gear and put the brakes on, and then sometime when I got down near where I'm supposed to be in another gear, then I'd try to run and try and get the right thing in there. So I had to learn how to toe and heel it. And I realized that if you were going to have a chance, well, you had to be halfway decent on the straightaways. So then I went to Joe Vitone in Riverside, who was an importer with Porsche Volkswagen, and bought a 1600 Porsche Speedster.
Stay with us, because when Dream Rides presented by Steel Rubber returns, we'll show you the saga of speedsters and stopwatches. Welcome back to All American Racers and Dream Rides presented by Steel Rubber. While the shop keeps busy, we continue our conversation with Dan Gurney.
Skip and I seldom raced each other, not because we didn't want to, but either I wasn't ready or he wasn't ready, and we became students of driving. So Skip and I made a solemn agreement with each other that we were going to go practice together. And I would time him with a stopwatch and he would time me with a stopwatch. And we agreed under no matter what the circumstance was, we were always going to do it to the very best of our ability. That was a very important part of learning how to drive, because in the end, if you have a style that ends up looking good on a stopwatch, that's a pretty good way to do it. And you can have all kinds of stuff that might even look better, but if it's not better on a stopwatch, shame on you. We heard that somebody was going to build a racetrack out near March Field, out at what became Riverside Raceway. And we couldn't believe how fortunate we were to be there this is our town, Riverside. And when they started bulldozing what became the route of Riverside Raceway, why we were often following that with our motorcycles. We often looked for places where Skip and I, with our stopwatch, near my folks' house, we figured out one circuit which had a couple of S-turns and another one and a straight and another right turn. So each lap, and we could time each other. We could do it in the same car. Often Skip had a very nice 44 Deluxe two-door with a good engine in it. Another road which was like a hill climb, and we called it the Burma Road. That was a good one. Skip and I were both looking for opportunities. Those that had opportunities, connections, were busy kicking our hands off of the ladder, naturally. I think Skip was a lot better than I was when it came to knocking on the door of opportunity and explaining what it was he wanted and selling himself. Darn good. And I was concentrating, since I was sort of tongue-tied, on trying to get to be as good a driver in case opportunity knocked. I wanted to be as ready as I knew how to be. Both Skip and I were invited to come up to a tryout at Willow Springs, operated by Tony Paravano. There were quite a few of the amateur drivers that were the top ones in road racing at the time up there. And the reason for the tryout is that Tony Paravano was going to take his stable to a road race in Florida, at New Smyrna Beach in Florida. We arrived there at Willow, and he had an array of cars that would just totally take your breath away, even today, if it could be done. I was one of the last ones to get out. The little Mondial is what the one I drove, was a little four-cylinder, 2-liter. I went out and I was driving turn 2 at Willow Springs is a long, gradual uphill that goes almost 180 degrees. I was going faster and faster, and I was going around that turn in top gear with opposite lock on, looking like Phil Walters. And I'm going around there, and all of a sudden, near the top, it got a little light as it came off the turn onto a little straightaway. And I ran out of lock. There wasn't any more I could turn, and I spun off on the right side at the end of a right-hand turn. And rocks and dirt and sand and everything flying, and I felt awful, but I fired it up, and I drove around, and I came by the start-finish line. I didn't just pull into the pits, and I thought, maybe, just maybe, with all the different cars out there, maybe they missed this thing. And I drove another 4 laps, and I drove as fast as I could. Then I pulled in, and all of a sudden, Paravano says, hey, somebody's been off of the road into my car, you know. And there was, the car was sitting there, and there was a little trickle of gasoline flowing down underneath the car. Who did it? I said, I did. And he said, you're fired. And I went and looked at where I had spun off, and I looked down, and here was a rock about this size, and it had aluminum from Paravano's fuel tank. And I grabbed that rock and still have it.
When we come back to Dream Rides presented by Steel Rubber, we'll learn how a chance encounter led to a breakthrough drive and international fame. Stay with us. This edition of Dream Rides, presented by Steel Rubber Products, is being brought to you by Custom Auto Sound, the originator of classic car OEM fit radios since 1977. Evapo Rust, super safe rust remover. And by Steel Rubber, quality crafted rubber parts and weather stripping. Welcome back to Dream Rides, presented by Steel Rubber, coming to you from All American Racers in Santa Ana, California. Our conversation with Dan Gurney continues.
The drought that seemed to follow blowing the opportunity at Willow Springs from Tony Paravano, the drought was, where are we going to ever find a chance to drive someone else's car? And we used to go, Skip and I both would go up to Willow with the hope that someone might be there. Nothing more than hope. Lo and behold, a guy named Cal Bailey was in there with a Corvette. Being sort of eager, I said, you're having trouble? Would you like me to show you how to drive around? So I did. I went out and I drove, and within 2 laps, I spun the car. But I went on running, and I ended up beating the existing track record for Corvettes, which was a good move. Remember I was saying earlier, as Skip and I were trying to climb up the ladder of opportunity in Southern California, why the guys that were already in position were kicking our hands off the ladder. Well, on this occasion, one of the guys kicking the hands was offered 2 chances to drive 2 different cars on the same weekend, and he couldn't. So they said, well, let's give Dan a chance. So I drove Cal Bailey's black Corvette and won the Corvette race. And that was a big breakthrough for my career. Well, later in the main race, I finished 6th against all the good cars with the Corvette, and made enough of an impression so that when another opportunity came up, my name was mentioned, and that was the beginning of it. I got a ride in Frank Arciero's 4.9 Ferrari. That was the opportunity.
In his first race for Frank Arciero, Dan finished 2nd at Riverside and followed that with victories in a variety of cars. Those successes caught the eye of the Ferrari factory team. And in 1959, 4 years after his first race in his Triumph TR2, Dan was a Grand Prix driver. For the next 11 years, he competed and won in every major racing series. Quite a career for a former hot rodder. That's all the time we have this week for Dream Rides presented by Steel Rubber. But be sure to join us next time when we'll visit the famous SoCal Speed Shop.